It's double string, you know, it's like a 12 string.
Yeah.
Not very much in tune, but you know, you get the idea. It's beautiful.
Sounds almost like a banjo.
Yeah, well, you know, they're kind of in the same
Yeah,
family,
in
four
the
string.
same family. That is
Isn't
beautiful.
it great?
And welcome to this in conversation with myself and with producer Tony Visconti, who has produced my new single, Don't Shoot the Messenger, which is out today on all streaming platforms. Or wherever you consume music. It's been an absolute dream come true to work with Tony. I've loved his music and everything he's produced from day one, really. So yeah, here we are. To all of the attendees, the chat is disabled, but there's a Q&A that you can submit questions, and there'll be some time at around 7:30 or so to answer some questions. So don't be shy, and thanks for thanks everyone for coming in on board. So I thought I'd begin this interview with a beautiful quote from your memoir. And it says, I feel equally comfortable with jazz standards of the 30s, 40s, 50s, rock and roll, pop, classical, and opera. I think that's why David Bowie and I have been such a creative team. He's never limited himself. And one of the things that inspires me about you, yeah, one of the things that inspires me is the breadth of music that you've recorded and produced over your lifetime. And so, what was your musical training? I know you ended up playing bass in various bands by your early teens, but what were the early steps in your musical training?
Well, I haven't had much formal music training, but have had some. I started out on my fifth Christmas when my parents gave me a toy ukulele, which was you could play. It was made of plastic, and it had pictures of Popeye the Sailor Man all over it, and all the strings had a different color. Like the top string was green, and the next string was red, yellow, and blue, and I could follow the chord diagrams in the little book that came along with it.
Yeah.
So I learned that book in a day. I mean, it was so easy to follow the chords and strum. And I grew up in a household filled with music. My mother could sing these beautiful Italian Neapolitan songs in the kitchen, and she had the most beautiful alto voice. And years later, I told her, I've heard the recordings we made back in those days. And I said, Mom, you could have been an opera singer. And she just pushed it aside and said, all Italians women sing that way, you know. So she underestimated her talent. She was very talented. My dad was not so talented in the vocal department, but he played the accordion really well, and he sang in barbershop quartets. So from the age of 5, I was hearing 4-part harmony. I knew that 4 people can sing 4 different notes and sound absolutely great. So growing up in that household gave me an enormous amount of ear training. And by age 11, I had graduated to guitar. I studied 3 years with a great guitar teacher in Brooklyn, New York. His name was Leon Block, and he wrote many numbers of books and on the subject. And he was a fantastic teacher. He taught me how to read music,
Right.
so I could sight read. And I played classical guitar with him. And then my next really great teacher, besides my father, uh, and Leon Block, was Dr. Silberman, who was he was the head of the music department in my high school. So he's the one who gave me formal training.
Right.
He immediately got me into my sophomore year. He gave me 5 music majors, which was orchestra in the morning, full orchestra, band, which was brass band and all that, marching band, music appreciation, uh, um, string quartet period. Although I couldn't play cello, I was playing the cello part on the bass fiddle and all that. And my father did get me besides the guitar, he got me a bass fiddle. So I was already playing that for a couple of years. But it was for the arranging and the composition and the orchestration. Dr. Silberman took me privately and showed me how to read mainly, my favorite composer, Beethoven scores. So I could follow the recordings and read all the lines at once. And, I could see what I heard made sense, what made sense on paper.
Wow.
And I started writing for my orchestra in my senior year of high school. And that's when my writing began. So
Wow.
after that, I had no more training, and I was just on my own and more or less self-taught from that point onwards.
Wow. And can you remember the first kind of orchestral arrangements that you wrote during that time, or were you more just kind of absorbing scores and reading scores?
No, the only things I wrote, I didn't write for orchestra. I wrote for string quartet, and
Right.
I could try that out. And I don't know, they were just little pieces, maybe 16 bar pieces,
Yeah.
and just so I could hear what was going on. If I had the knack for it, is always, what do you do with a viola? That's a big question
Yeah.
that we all scratch our heads about still today. But that's what I learned what to do with a viola. And so by the time I got to London in '67, I was really good at writing. I could write, and I was immediately put to work, and all my skills just, now that I was in the workplace, that's very different from school.
Yeah.
When you're in the workplace, you have to be sharp, and I got sharp really quick. I just couldn't let my boss down. I loved him so much.
And that was Denny Cordell.
Danny Cordell, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. One of many amazing facts that I read in this book is that you sat in the orchestral overdub session for the Aretha Medine produced hit by Aretha Franklin, "You Make Me Feel Like a Natural Woman." How did this come about, and was she present in the session?
No, she wasn't present, but Arif was recording, overlaying the orchestra in Atlantic Records Studios in New York, in a place called Columbus Circle. It's just immediately south of Central Park.
Yeah.
And my best friend, who lived around the corner from me in Brooklyn, got a job there as a recording engineer. And he was about 3 years older than me, so he was already working professionally. And he was an electronic whiz. I mean, he went to Brooklyn Tech School, so he could take apart a radio. Maybe it would have 100 pieces in it in those days, and he'd put it back together again. He just knew how everything worked.
Wow.
So he invited me into that session. He said, we have this big date, with a lot of string players and horn players, and Arif is conducting. And I never heard the song before because it wasn't released yet, but it was "You
Right.
Make Me Feel Like a Natural Woman." And I was in heaven. I was sitting in the back of the studio listening to the banter. I mean, I never heard the banter between conductor and orchestra before. It was so professional and it was so precise. And my only contribution to that session was, like, Arif came in and I was introduced to him, but I was just a kid, really, from Brooklyn. I was actually about 20 or 21, and he was scratching his head, saying, "It's good, but something is wrong. Something is wrong." And I think this is what I said. I whispered to Bruce. I said, "The French horns are out of tune."
Yeah.
And Bruce said in a loud voice, "My friend Tony said the French horns are out of tune." And I nearly had to run to the men's room. I was so nervous. But Arif just looked at me and he said, "Play it again." And he says, "You're right." So he got in there and he made them tune all you can tune a French horn. All the little pistons have a little bit of plumbing in there you could shove in and pull out and all that. So I don't know. And I'd like to think I saved the session,
Right.
but I contributed a little bit to it, and I feel very proud that I stood up and said my little piece there. I contributed.
Yeah, that's so exciting. Another thing that I learned was that you wrote the bass and mixed the track for the Joe Cocker hit "Have a Little Help from My Friends," as well as attending the vocal session. How did you end up doing this, and was this in England?
Well, it was in England. Denny and I recorded the backing track about a month or two earlier in Olympic Studios in Barnes. And I didn't, it's actually, it must be a typo there. I wrote the brass part, not the bass part.
Oh, okay.
You're leaving out an R there.
An
So,
R, okay.
brass, bass, what's the difference? An R. But so I wrote the brass parts, which you can hear, they only really come in at the end of the song. But I was there at many stages, actually laying down the track with B.J. Cole, who was a drummer for Procol Harum.
Yeah.
And uh, Chris Stainton was Joe's partner from Sheffield, and he played the bass.
Yeah.
And I forget who the organist was, very, very famous organist. But Jimmy Page was the lead guitarist on that. And
Wow.
I got to see all these stages done, and then of course my sessions with the brass. But the most amazing thing was we had all this on 8-track tape. That was the maximum in those days, and
Yeah.
we had 1 track left for the vocal. So nowadays with Pro Tools you can keep 100 playlists. You
Yeah.
can keep 100 vocals, and then some poor person has to deal with that at the end. But we couldn't do that. We had 1 track left. And if Joe would sing his heart out, Denny would say, "It's just not right, Joe. You got to do it again." But we couldn't keep the previous take.
Yeah.
There was no way we could keep the previous take. So I spent a few hours with the two of them in there. And I think no, it was Peter Grant, who was our recording engineer, not Glyn John, who was usually there.
Yeah.
But he wasn't. It was Peter Grant. And Joe was singing like you could almost see blood coming out of his mouth. He was
Yeah.
singing so hard and all that. And Denny said, "I still don't think you're singing good enough." So he said, "Let's raise the mic." So he raised the mic over Joe's head, about a good 1.5 feet over Joe's head. And he had him tilt his head back and sing up, which now that I know years later, that's really the wrong way to sing.
Right.
You shouldn't bend the back of your neck when you're singing.
Yeah.
You should keep it straight. But anyway, Joe, like myself, Denny was like King Arthur.
Yeah.
You wanted to please him. If he asked you to do something, if it meant losing a limb, you would do it for him.
Yeah.
You love this. I love this man. Joe loved this man. So there was Joe struggling, singing upwards towards the mic, and finally, maybe after about 30 takes, and now this time Joe's all raspy and hoarse and all that.
Yeah.
That was the vocal take. I mean, there was no other we could show you or play to you now.
Right.
So I had never seen anyone push someone that hard in my life, and I thought it was rather cruel.
Yeah.
But I learned my lesson, that the lesson is basically, when you're in the studio and you're making a recording, you have to feel like it's going to outlive you, and it's
Yeah.
going to become a classic. So you have to put everything in it. It's not a job of work. It's not a job. It's a passion. And that's what I learned in that lesson, that Denny had a passion in his mind about how perfect this record had to sound. And Joe had a passion to please Denny, to get the best vocal possible. And I'm sitting there with my jaw dropped, looking at this thing that I would normally not do with my friends.
Yeah.
This is the big time.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. You have a relationship to working with folk artists. And what is it that attracts you to folk music, especially folk music of these small islands, which you're in New York and I'm in London, but you seem to really warm to the folk music of the British Isles, so to speak.
Well, my only association with folk in America was Bob Dylan, and it was contemporary folk. It was, but he did sing the occasional Woody Guthrie ballad. I learned about Woody Guthrie through Bob Dylan, and I like the fact that a person was self-contained. They can just hold a guitar and
Yeah.
and sing about subjects you wouldn't normally hear in a pop song. So this was a terrific medium that I grew fond of. And when I went to London, in my first year, I did arrangements for everybody. Like you name it, I did an arrangement, any style, anything. And a lot of those people came from the folk world. The
Yeah.
main one was Bert Jantz, who was in Pentangle,
Yeah.
the folk group Pentangle. So I wrote a few arrangements for him, and also for Ralph McTell.
Yes.
And now I said, wow, there's something special. I mean, this is very different music from American contemporary folk music, but I can hear the roots of American folk music in these singers. The British and Irish migrated to Appalachia in America, and those beautiful, mournful folk songs from the Appalachian Mountains come from Britain. You know, they originated in Britain. So I felt at home. And also the budgets are really low. So a folk singer doesn't cost a lot of money to record. So there was a plethora of folk singers that I was introduced to in a very short period.
Yeah.
Great. I love them. I love those people. They also, you know, they roll their own cigarettes. They wearing flannel shirts with checkers on them. You know, that's different from a rock star. It's a relief from a rock star.
Yeah, for sure. And on the subject of string arranging, when we were recording Don't Shoot the Messenger, you were giving us a bit of a T-Rex string writing masterclass. Could you elaborate on that a little bit about how you doubled certain parts? I mean, we were completely spellbound when you were telling us all of this, by the way.
Well, the trick with writing, my trick with writing strings for a pop record is to, what people normally do is they just put the very long high notes and, you know, they put the occasional run up to them, you know, to make it look like they've gone to school. You know, they write the like that.
Yeah.
What I do is I take elements out of the musicians who perform the track, like yourself, the guitarist, the you know, the little busking things, the things that were busked. Now, if you get a string players to play those little licks that the busker that was busked initially, then you suddenly make it legitimate.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's a little twiddle on a guitar, but if a strings are doing like they're doing the same twiddle,
Yeah.
it's magic. It's absolutely magic. And it sounds like it was pre-planned. But in fact, it's after the fact that I do things like that. I draw things out of the, you know, the recording, and I put them on some of the licks onto strings and just make them sound bigger and better and more beautiful.
Yeah, and epic. Another fact that I loved learning was when you were mixing Bowie's Diamond Dogs, you described this amazing scenario where Bowie made this, he hired all of this equipment and you sort of collaborated on making what was like a video treatment together. Um,
Oh yeah.
yeah, and this was a time before PCs, and you kind of mentioned that you'd never seen the film since. I just like this feels quite pertinent in a time when musicians are making content during lockdown. I mean, I hate that word, but you know, it and it felt that well, here was Bowie doing this with Diamond Dogs kind of decades before even we had PCs. Do you remember what the making of this Diamond Dogs film was like?
I do.
Yeah.
He was staying in off Fifth Avenue in New York, the Hotel Pierre, very ritzy, very expensive hotel, and he was staying in a suite. So he had, you know, bedroom, big lounge, and, you know, he had a couple of rooms in this suite. And he just got it into his mind that he wanted to make a movie about Diamond Dogs, and he wanted to sell it to a producer, you know, a Hollywood producer or a British producer. So he got loads and loads of uh, hard, you know, whiteboard from an art store
Yeah.
and balsa wood and all kinds of stuff. So he constructed a future dystopian city in
Yeah.
his front room, and he painted it, and it looked a bit like a 1930s, you know, the windows kind of were that long slanty dark thing. You know, he was doing and he was always a really great artist himself.
Yeah.
So he painted the whole set, and he filmed it for about 20 minutes, just nothing in there. And he rented, well, I have to say, he rented all this equipment, this Sony a mixer, a video mixer, a couple of cameras, and soundboard and all that. I mean, this was very expensive in those days,
Yeah.
and I'm sure he taught himself how to use it. I don't think when it arrived, he just probably spent a few days saying, "How does this all work?" and how does it. You might have had someone show him together, but I didn't. I don't know what happened, you know, when he first got the material. But by the time I helped him with this, he had it all figured out. And this set he made it look like it was about 30 feet tall because he was on another camera and he superimposed himself in front of this set. So he would point up and he goes, the diamond dog would drop from that roof, you know, and he'd be pointing up to the roof and he'd be looking up, but, you know, the set is only about 5 feet tall.
Oh my God.
And he's in there. He made himself little, and he made himself in there. And I helped him with some of the camera work and some operating some of the equipment, but I basically watched him do all this. So I mean, I mean, he needed a second pair of hands for sure, and that's what I did. Yeah. Oh, it was
Yeah,
amazing. It was amazing, and this is the '70s.
yeah, yeah. You're almost making the set sound like it's making me think of Metropolis more than anything. Yeah,
That's it. I couldn't remember. It was Metropolis in a
yeah,
way. It was definitely uh,
yeah.
homage to Metropolis. I wish this film. I don't know if it's been seen since, but it's quite amazing.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think we're all just gonna have to live with imagining it because it's very, very evocative how you're describing it. And I'd love to ask you about the introduction of the Eventide harmonizer and also Brian Eno into Bowie's music making process. As the producer of the legendary Berlin trilogy, how did both of these things affect the process?
We were a really good working team, the three of us. I remember before Low, Brian and David were started to write or just talk about the conception of Low, and I think they were in Switzerland. David had a home in Switzerland, so they phoned me in London, and they told me the concept, and I thought, they knew they were going to make a side full of songs and a side full of ambient music based on the way Brian wrote, and David would write with him the ambient stuff, which was really busk. There was no writing involved. It was just feel stuff and all that. And so I said, okay. And they said, now, what could you bring to the table? By the way, that's the first time I heard that phrase ever in my life. What bring to the table? Like, what do you want? A turkey? Bowl of fruit? But I gathered they want me to say something more clever than that. So I said, well, I've got this Eventide harmonizer. It's just absolutely amazing. It's got so many applications. And they said, well, what applications? What does it do? And I said, well, it fucks with the fabric of time.
Yes.
And and they whooped, you could hear them scream, like they just stepped away from the phone and started whooping and all that. They wanted to hear something like that. And I don't know, I just felt like that no one had heard. I had the only one. So because these things were, they were like so expensive, the price of a car almost, now it's a plug-in for $50.
Right, yeah. Yeah.
But so I had to get rid of a lot of money that year, according to my accountant. So I bought this harmonizer, not even sure of what it could do, but I played with it for a few weeks, and I knew this drum sound. I was getting the pooh, the drum sound on there where it kind of descends and all that. I already knew about that and what it could do to voices and virtually any instrument. So when I brought it over there, they immediately, like we unboxed it, and it's almost like gold rays emitted from it. They wanted
Yeah.
me to put this in action immediately, which is what I did.
Mm.
So Brian and David were, they were working with cut ups. The David would make lyrics like that, and musically they were doing that too. They were doing what Brian does well, which is he doesn't walk. He's an iconoclast.
Yeah.
He walks to the beat of a different drum.
Yeah.
And oh, by the way, I've got his deck of cards right here.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah,
Yes.
he's
Yeah.
never far from my life.
Oh,
I
wonderful.
adore Brian.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Wonderful.
So
And
the three of us just worked together in harmony. Like it was really, really great.
yeah, yeah, that's well, I mean, it's brought us all so many hours of pleasure. There's a great anecdote about interviewing Iggy Pop in the studio and how you'd keep the tape rolling and just keep asking him questions, and he would just say more and more outrageous things. Are there any stories that he came out with during those recording sessions that you can share without getting into trouble?
They were mainly stories about the Stooges,
Yeah.
about how they used to beat each other up all the time backstage. They never said a civil word to each other. It was like a constant, and it was just one long narrative, and about how he never meant to cut himself on stage. He did it one night only. He broke a glass on the stage, and then he jumped on it. When he got up, he was bleeding,
Yeah.
Then when he didn't do it the second night, everyone booed him. They thought this was part of the act.
Right.
So he said, I didn't want to do this every night. He says, but I ended up doing it because I was going to lose my audience. Just kind of stories like that. But it was never, he never put a full stop in a sentence. He was just rambling on and on. And this started out in the control room, and David and I looked at each other and we said, this was night after night when we were making Low.
Yeah.
And David said, we've got to get this on tape. And I said, that's what I'm thinking. So we recorded these things, and with Iggy's permission.
Yeah.
And until David's passing, I kept reminding him. I said, "You've got those tapes. We got to do something with them."
Right.
And it's just that David, once he moved on to another project, he never took a look backwards.
Yeah.
So we never did. I wish the public can hear these. It's just fantastic. They're
Oh,
fantastic.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember one of the stories I first read in Please Kill Me was one of the first ever Stooges performances where apparently Iggy made a wig out of tin foil, and he found some sort of a thrift shop silver dress and just kind of started leaping around on stage. I mean, that reminds me of like half of my performance art friends. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
I loved it. I was like, great. I want to see Iggy with a foil wig on. Another great fact that I learned is that you worked with the teenage Hans Zimmer when he was a keyboardist. Which band was this? And could you have predicted what he was going to become in that session? Or was he just some kid then?
No, he wasn't too much of a kid. He was very smart. He
Right.
was the artist was Zane Griff, who comes from New Zealand,
Yeah.
and he very very handsome man, writes great music, and all that, and a big Bowie fan. He'll never deny that. And we wanted to use sequencing. Just became all the rage. Sequencing and repetitive and loops. Like or staccato, like that 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 that, like Kraftwerk probably started a bit of that. And Roland made this thing called an M4 and then later on an M8. It was just a 4-track MIDI sequencer. And Hans was the only one in London who knew how it worked.
Yeah.
And believe me, this was arcane knowledge in those days when they first came out. Like people like myself who were a little older than Hans, I thought, oh, I could never learn this. It's got buttons and knobs, and it's not audio. It's this thing called MIDI. So Hans was very, very useful for that whole album. He was there for the entire album. And if you get, I think the album's called Ashes and Diamonds. So Hans is all over that. He didn't actually play keyboards, but he programmed. He was a
Okay.
programmer.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that's how he came into my life. And, we're still good mates. And so I'm good mates with Zane Griff as well.
Fantastic. Fantastic. There was a question about, yes, this is one of the things that I loved so much. I loved learning that you mixed Golden Brown by the Stranglers. And what I love is that these Baroque instruments are as tough as nails. I mean, they sound like rock instruments. So was that the idea behind how you approached the mix for that track?
Well, here's the deal. They never worked with producers. They were another band that used to have punch ups and like they were a bit disparate with each other. And so they wanted me to mix that album, and Golden Brown was on the album. And on the first day, Jean-Jacques Brunel comes in. He's the bass player. He's a karate expert and a punk, and he's
Yeah.
always looking for a fight. Always got his chin out like that. And, and he said to me, what did he say to me? He goes, we think something like I was working with another artist. We think T-Rex sucks or David Bowie sucks, but we like the way your mixes sound on radio. So that's why they booked me. They didn't like anyone I was working with, but they liked my mixes the way they sounded on the radio. And they never had a radio hit. I think they might have had a minor one. And I said, okay, that's a nice compliment. Thank you. you know, like everyone you work with is a load of bollocks, but we like your mixes. Basically, that's what his message was. So Golden Brown was one of the first things I mixed, and I made sure that if it's going to be on the radio, and if that's the brief that they're giving me, I'm going to make sure it pops out of the speakers. And in those days, I had like an array of speakers all over the top of my console, and I
Yeah.
had a radio. I actually had a radio wired up for sound
Right.
with transistors in it, and you actually turned the radio on. It was coming through a commercial, famous British radio. I forget the name of it was. So I made sure things did fly. There's a way of mixing where you get that edgy sound, where especially AM radio. No one had FM in those days. It would just fly out. It would be bright, so it would go through all the muddy kind of AM sound,
Yeah.
and it worked. They got them not only then, not first number one hit single. The album, I believe, went to number one as well. So
Yeah.
for them it was a good choice in using me, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, yeah, especially because they think like I love the way you said bollocks a few minutes ago. You said bollocks and not like bollocks, like how they might say it.
Bollocks, bollocks.
Um, I read that Bowie wrote and made backing tracks first, and then he wrote the melodies and lyrics. Was this the standard way that he would craft together songs, or were there other methods that you worked on together?
Oh, he drove me crazy with this. And when we were making The Man Who Sold the World, that's when he started this thing. And he was a slow writer in those
Yeah.
days. It'd take him ages to finish a song, to finish anything, in fact. He needed people to like G him up and get him at it.
Yeah.
And so we did The Man Who Sold the World. We had about 3 songs where he said, I'm sorry, fellas, all I have is chords. And I'm looking at him, I'm going, we've got 3 days to go. And I was working for the label, not for him. I was saying, we got 3 days, we can't go over budget. I was told that.
Yeah.
They said, he's only had that one hit, Space Oddity. We don't know what else he's got. So anyway, we finally, on the last day of the last mix, he finally wrote the words to The Man Who Sold the World. I didn't even know what the song was about. It was a working title, The Man Who Sold the World. So anyway, we got that done, and I went back to Mark Bolan after that album, who I was sure of. Like Mark Bolan always had too many songs.
Yeah.
He would write too many. Years later, David thought that this was a good way to work. But by that time he already had a lot of hits. He went his way, I went my way, and we came back together on Diamond Dogs, which he produced. He produced that album himself. I co-produced the end of it with him, and I did all the mixes. But by then I could rely on him. If he said he was going to just lay down backing tracks, and he would tell me, I'm going to write the lyrics later, I said, okay, well, we'll concentrate on the music. We'll make it as evocative as possible. And that's what he was looking for. Like he was looking for, what is the music telling me to say? That's what he was doing.
Yeah.
And for instance, Scary Monsters, he needed 3 months off to come back and he needed 3 months to write the songs. But apart from that, like albums like Heroes,
Yeah.
he had just a hook in his mind. Like Heroes, he wrote, we had the backing track down, and he said to me, I don't have any words yet. Could you take a little bit of a walk? So our backing singer, Antonia Maas and I took a walk by the Berlin Wall. We kissed by the wall. He saw it. He wrote us into the song. I mean, that's how he was, writing. He was writing what he saw and what he felt in the moment.
Yeah.
And then by the time we came back, he went out in the front of the microphone and he sang Heroes. And another couple of songs on that album, Joe the Lion, I think it was, had no lyrics to it. He just went out and he sang, Joe the Lion. He goes, okay, stop the machine. And he goes, okay, start the machine. After Joe the Lion, drop me in and all that. So by now I knew he could pull it off. But when he first pulled that on me back in the day, I was screaming,
Yeah, well, yeah, you got that label breathing down your neck. You've worked with so many extraordinary voices, from Bowie, Boland, Russell Mael and Sparks, who I love so much, Elaine Page, Hazel O'Connor, Christine Young, such incredible vocalists. And you've also worked with Esperanza Spalding. Could you describe what it was like working with her?
Again, it's a case of I'm working with you because I like your mixes on the radio and all that. That's exactly, it was almost echoing exactly what Jean-Jacques said to me. Only she was like very nice
Yeah.
and very, very, very sweet. And you can tell confidence oozed out of every pore of her. She's she's not very tall, you know. We didn't see eye to eye. But she had this laid back confidence, like she could do anything. And if you know you wanted to test her, she'd just pick up the bass and shred, you know,
Yeah.
something like that. So that's exactly what she did. She didn't finish most of her bass parts. She recorded her bass parts with me
Yeah.
and would sit there on the settee right behind me and just be she'd be plugged into a preamp. I don't think we used an amplifier. And she'd cross her leg and she'd lay back. You know, you shouldn't play that way. You should be played sat up, you know.
Yeah.
And she'd be like slouch back like that. And I go, that's amazing. How do you do that?
Yeah.
And she said, that's just what I do.
Yeah.
So, and then her singing was no less perfect. She would go out into my little vocal booth here and knock off about 3 takes.
Yeah.
And she'd come back in the control room and we'd comp them together. You know, she wouldn't do 20 takes, 25 takes. And you couldn't really tell the difference too much. You know, each take was usable. You could use that for the whole song. And then we actually did some backing. Once we got to really know each other, she didn't know all I could do. She thought I was just a mixing engineer.
Yeah.
Then I wrote backing vocals with her, and we did a few other nice things. And then one sweet thing she did was there was a Bowie benefit in Carnegie Hall,
Yeah.
and Esperanza was invited to play, and it was she played this kind of jazz song that he wrote, "If You Could See Me," and it's I forget what album. I think it was on Heathen, and or maybe Reality. I can't remember. But again, she played and sang that song at the same time, and
Gorgeous.
yeah, it was terrific. Terrific working with her. I really loved every moment.
Yeah. Well, just as we're starting to wind this interview down, I just want to remind any of the attendees, if you've got any questions, there's a Q&A function just in the middle of the screen. Just, yeah, don't be shy. There are so many amazing things to ask Tony about. I mean, I'm lucky. I get to do this off Zoom webinar interviews. I just wanted to ask you about your work with Anjali Kijo, and it was the album. It was called Jin Jin. Like, was that
Jean
name?
Jean, yeah, Jean
Yeah.
Jean.
Yeah. Where did you record that, and what was it like?
We recorded it in 2 recording studios in New York City.
Mm.
I temporarily forget the name of the tracking studio, but we had a room full of musicians. It was so old school. We had about 5 musicians from the US and 2 musicians from her country, Benin. So we had these African percussionists who the only language we could all communicate in was French, because French is spoken in a lot of African countries.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, it was staggering to stand in the middle of the room with a live drummer, bass player, guitarist, and they're playing those beautiful rhythms, and explain to me like how the emphasis on their kind of African music was they would put it on beat number 4, whereas in Western music it's beat number 1 and number 3, you know, and they would go 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, you know. I learned so much from these people. It was incredible. And Angelique is a firecracker.
Yeah.
She just stands in the middle of the room and sings on beautifully, like, you know, never a wrong note. And she dances, you know, she does all African dancing as she's singing.
Yeah.
So this was, you could hardly call this work. This was like a holiday. It was just such
Yeah.
a great album to produce. And then afterwards, she did her vocals and a few other overdubs at my smaller studio, which I shared with David Bowie, and I shared this with Philip Glass, you know, on Broadway down near Bleecker Street. So she was total fun to work with. And also, you know, I had experience recording with another African group, Osibisa, many
Yes.
years
Yes.
prior, which she knew them, you know,
Oh,
and
wow.
uh, and she knew my albums, and that's why I got the job. You know, she
That's
knew
so
she,
cool. cool. Yeah, I read a story about how the Black Panthers came to visit you during the OCBSA studio sessions.
Yes.
What was that
Oh,
like?
that was scary as hell. These Black Panthers came in from maybe LA or something like
Yeah.
that, and they were, they were wearing black and they had the black berets, and they were about 7 feet tall. And Africans aren't that tall, like, and they just wanted to check out that Osibisa was doing the right thing, politically, culturally, and all that. And it was terrifying. They were just looking down at all of us, and I'm the only white guy in the room. And I'm thinking, something bad is gonna happen to me. But it was great. And OCBSA like listened to them, and they basically were saying, we're brothers. We come from America, you come from Africa, but we got to do, talking about basically Black Lives Matter and Black issues matter and all that. So, but OCBSA was a little terrified. This is they never encountered American Black people like Black Panthers before.
Yeah.
I'm sure American Blacks, but not Black Panthers. They were really big dudes.
Yeah. 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 So we've just had some questions come in, and this is from Callie Statham. Hi Bishi, I'd like to know what Tony is listening to at the moment. What are you listening to at the moment?
I'm listening to BISHI. uh, well, I do have a few favorite things I'm listening to at the moment, but I don't dwell on them. I listen to a few things, and I follow different people online. Um, I really couldn't say that. I should always be prepared for that question, but
Yeah.
I'll probably get off this and I'll remember exactly who I'm listening to.
I'm like that as well. I'm constantly streaming things, or I'm researching things, or I'm checking out new releases, and then I sort of draw a blank. This is a question from Vic Bain. Hi to both Bishi and Tony. How come you ended up working together? Do you have plans to work together again in the future? And what other artists is Tony gonna work with in the coming year? How did we
Oh,
end up working together? Well, it's through
well,
Daphne, wasn't it?
through Daphne Guinness, yeah, and Malcolm Doherty, who was her manager and co-writer, and we were recording some of her album in Ireland, in Dublin, and Malcolm says, "Okay, if I invite a couple of friends over from London," and I said, "Why not?" And that was you. I forget who your friend's name was, but I remember you.
Yeah, yeah. It was Anna Matronic from Scissor Sisters. And
Of course, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, but she was in an off stage. She was in her doing her off stage glamour.
Oh, okay, yeah. No, you were always glamorous. But when I heard your music, I thought, wow, you're a great singer and a great writer, and you come from a kind of an Anglo-Indian, culture, and you've managed to meld both. And I found that completely uh, up my alley because I love hybrid music. I always taught David always loved putting two cultures together,
Yeah,
and I like on Low there's that song Yassassin, which is Arabic music with a reggae beat,
yeah,
So it's Jamaican reggae with Arabic like melodies on top, and you have a way of making your culture. You express it through British culture
yeah.
and the British music. And then what I later found out working with you is what a great singer you are. Like Esperanza, you stand in front of that microphone and you never make a mistake. You just bang, it comes out of you like perfectly. So like that's why we're working together,
Yeah.
and I hope we do more. And also, I made a new solo album which you did a couple of vocals for, and you just sound so great. Every time I hear that, I'm mixing it. I lift you higher and higher in the mix.
Oh, fantastic, fantastic. I absolutely I loved recording so much, and I think one of the things that we really bonded over was the love of Bulgarian vocal music, and I did a lot of training in that vocal music. So
Yeah.
I'm just so yeah, it's I mean what can I say? It's been a dream come true to record with you, and yes, I really hope that we do more in the future. This is a question from an anonymous attendee. If you had to choose one piece of music gear, what is your favorite?
Gear?
Yeah, gear.
Gear.
You got loads of
Well,
gear in your studio.
yeah, I got this thing is never far from me. It's I don't know if you could see it. It's the I'll turn the camera.
Nice.
The Eventide H9. It's a stump, it's a pedal,
Yeah.
but it's got the best sounds for guitar and bass that you would find on an H9000. The Eventide harmonizer, the 3000, all the best sounds for guitar and vocals. I mean, you don't have to use it for guitar. You could use it for a vocal.
Yeah.
I'm about to lose my camera. So that's it. That's my piece of gear. The
Yeah.
Eventide H9.
Fantastic. I wonder what a sitar would sound through that. Just off the top there. But yeah,
We'll have to find out.
yeah, absolutely. You're on. This is a question from Simon Hoare, and he's like, "Hi Bishi, hi Tony. Hot Love was the first record that I heard, which made me feel something sexy. When you were making that record or any T-Rex records, did you think they sounded sexy?" And he wants you to know that he's loved your work ever since.
I think Mark was very conscious of making his music sexy. He was a sexy little guy. He loved sex and he loved music and he managed to meld them together, But no, I think Hot Love is kind of sexy and that kind of cowboy beat, even riding a horse is kind of sexy and it's boom 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 boom, that it's very odd for a pop song to have that beat too. Like
Yeah.
Mark would always pull strange things out of the hat. He was like David. He would pull surprises and he'd have something special that you wouldn't think of yourself, and but yeah, like even Jeepster is even sexier.
Yeah.
Jeepster is quite rude song.
This is from Sean Tierney. Hi guys, thanks for this webinar. It's been great. I'm a student hoping to begin a research master's on the producer performer relationship. The quote read out at the beginning of this chat referred to Tony and Bowie as a creative team. I'm just wondering what Tony would describe as the most important factor in their professional relationship. What a great question.
I would say friendship. He trusted me. He trusted me. He knew that I was always on his side, and I would take his side, and and he could. He see he. I don't think he would mind me saying this. When other people were in the room, like great musicians, who were really professionals, they were keyboard whiz kids, he would never play an instrument in front of them. He felt like they would look down on him. And only when the room was cleared and we were working together, I would take out my keyboard, set it up, and he would play his own keyboard parts. And it needed some editing, like which is normal. But he loved the fact that I completely was non-judgmental about his musicianship. And by the way, he wasn't that bad. He was just putting that on himself. That everyone's like for instance Mike Garson. David Bowie wouldn't play piano in front of Mike Garson. It's kind of that situation. And most of his keyboard players were virtuosos. But and singing, he would feel a lot calmer when no one else was in the room except him and myself. And that's how we ended up doing a lot of backing vocals together. We just have an engineer, and I would, I'm singing all the background vocals on Heroes, for instance, the whole album. Uh, and so I don't know, it's just friendship. We knew each other by the time that lovely man passed away. We knew each other about 48 years.
Wow. Wow.
And he made his last 4 albums with me. So I think that's what speaks to the friendship.
Yeah. Well, I remember I was lucky enough for the first time I came round to your studio, you showed me like the digital kind of 4-track recorder and you played me like a demo of Black Star and it sounded amazing. Yeah, I mean it actually gave me a lot of confidence to do more production stuff myself. It's like, oh wow, it just yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, so thank you so much for that. So we have about 10 minutes before we wrap up. I'm just going to take one more question, and it's from Pete Olshansky. Do you have a favorite Bowie record that you didn't work on, and why?
Oh, I love Station to Station. And I know enough about David to know that he didn't have a lot of time. It's a real quick album. It was made very quickly. Uh, and he didn't have a lot of time. And he say to himself, well, if this album is going to be minimalistic, I'll make the best of it. You know, because there aren't loads of overdubs on that album. There's no orchestras on it, and it's just all the beauty in it is in the songwriting and the performances.
Yeah.
And it's like, you know, it's, of course it's well produced, but it's not a great production. It's functional to Bowie as being the centerpiece of it. So that is my favorite non-produced album that I like very much.
Fantastic. And yeah, I think there's one quick question. Tony, you must get so many artists wanting to work with you, and how do you decide who to work with from another anonymous attendee? How do you pick artists you like?
Well, I've got a great manager, and if you send my manager your demo, I listen to everything. I listen to everything. I don't have someone do it for me because I don't think anyone knows what I like except me. And so if I don't like it, I'm one of the few people who will send feedback back to the person. I will tell you why I don't like it. And it's not that I don't like it, it's that maybe the person is not ready. They could go back and try to write better songs, you know, improve themselves, because I remind them of how competitive it is. You know, apparently for like every thousand, maybe it's a bigger number. So let's say, for the sake of an argument, 10,000 singles produced,
Yeah.
only one gets in the charts, you
Yeah.
know. So you're in competition with 999, 9,099, yeah, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
to get me as your producer, you got to be hot. And I think I'm hot, you know, and the combination, I could be wrong, the combination of those two kinds of heat waves might create something great. But you got to have it. You know, I'll let you know if you have it or you don't have it, and I'll certainly encourage a person. I won't trash anybody. I'll find the good stuff that they could build up on
Yeah.
in their music.
Great. And there's one quick question from a really fantastic composer and singer, Aliv Lenz. She says, as a producer, when you want to support an artist or a project you love, does it ever happen you only charge points and not per track fee as well? Or do you take everything project by project?
Uh, I I say that, I mean, I have to have a fee must be involved because, like you, I pay bills.
Yeah.
So that's the only reason. You know, I'm not Simon Legree. I don't squander money, but you know, so but I will adjust fees according to what a person can afford. And of course, I won't work only for points, because that in this business that's almost a fool's game, because the chances are there aren't going to be no points at the end of the day. The chances are it could be,
Yeah.
but I've never been in a situation where I worked for points and the record I worked for points on is a massive hit. It's never happened to me. I don't think it will ever happen. Therefore, a fee is required. But you know, I'll drop the fee if I love the person. If I really love the person's music, I'll drop it to a low point, or almost nothing. You know, I'll do singles. You know, if I really feel, and if something comes of that, then you know, then we talk business later of want to continue things like that. You know, but I'm so for the artist, and I'm not in it for the money. I'm in it for the love of making music.
Wonderful.
I think it's evident because I'm
Yeah.
still doing it.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And when can we hear your new solo album?
I don't know. I'm working with Christine Young at the moment on her next solo album,
Oh,
and
I love Lizzy.
it's a corker. It's really sounding wonderful.
Yeah.
I worked with Brian Starr this summer. I don't look him up. It's Brian Brion
Yeah.
Starr, like Ringo Starr. I just mixed his new album. He's a young guy. He's great music. So I keep, like as usual, I can't work on my album if I'm working with other people.
Right.
And I've got a political song I wrote on, a song called Politics. You sang on that song.
Oh,
It
right. Was that the Be Free? Oh, no, no, that was the other one. Okay.
Yeah. Flip flop, they never stop, that one.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I'd like to release it just before the election, but my God, I don't know if I possibly can. And I had to change one lyric from, I wrote it so long ago, I had to change one lyric from Hillary's emails to now Joe Biden's emails. I had to put
Right.
Joe Biden in it because Hillary lost. But let's hope for Joe Biden. Yeah. Now
Yes.
you know. Now you know who I'm voting for. So anyway, my album, I don't know, might come out January now. Realistically, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, wonderful. Well, we will be keeping our ears peeled, and our eyes peeled as well. It's now 4 minutes before the end of the webinar. I just want to thank everybody for joining in. And yeah, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, Tony, and just to pick your brains and just you know, I've learned so much from working with you. So thank you so
Thank
much
you,
for your
Bishi.
time. Thank you.
Thank you, Bishi.
Yeah, and yes, and everybody out there, go and stream and buy the single and support and you know help support this really wonderful moment. And thank you so much. Yeah, bye
And,
bye. Do
and
I?
good luck with the single.
Thank you, thank you. It's getting
You,
some great radio play and bloggers love it. And yeah, I couldn't be happier. I
you
really.
deserve it. You. This is a great record we made together. It's really
Thank,
great.
yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you. Okay. Bye bye, everyone. Bye bye, darling. Lots of love.
Bye bye.
Bye
Bye bye, Emma.
bye. Yeah. Thank you, Emma. Okay. Bye.
Bye.